So I suggest we kick off this session today, totally dedicated to Tandem and all of our Tandem instructors participating. So welcome everybody. It's going to be Mikey and myself that's going to moderate the session, and of course we're going to leave most of the part to Tom, our very welcomed guest from UPT. I will let him introduce himself right away. Maybe some small rules, like you're all going to be muted except for Tom. And if you have any questions to ask to Tom, please write them in the chat box so he can do his story. And as soon as there is a subject or a topic finished, then we will try to see if we can get these questions over to him. Also, if you don't feel like typing in English, no problem. You can also type in French or in Dutch. That's not a problem. We will translate that. Don't forget to fill in the forms. You can also find them in the chat, so we can also have a small view on who you are. And we'll also share that information somewhere when we find a break moment. And at the end, there is a raffle, so you can participate for a raffle and win a jump ticket. So let's see if we can make a fun part of that. So there we go. Tom, the floor is yours.
Okay, greetings everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you and share some thoughts and ideas. Normally, when I give a presentation, it's in front of a group of people, whether it's a small group, 2 or 3 people, or a large group, 100 or 150 people. I'm usually standing in front of a group of people that I can interact with, that I can see facial expressions, that I can ask questions, get answers back. So I offer you that with an apology before we even start. This is only my 5th or 6th Zoom conference like this, so I'm not very good at talking into a camera as opposed to talking to a person face to face. So if it sounds like I'm lost in thought or I'm not speaking clearly, just pause me, someone wave and say, stop, hey, come back to us, and we'll come back and we'll regroup and keep moving with our message. So does that sound good? Okay, great. So the concept of this continuing education seminar is really just to get everyone to think about their tandem performance. Every one of us. It doesn't matter whether you have 100 tandem jumps and this is your first season, or if you have 10,000 tandem jumps and this is your 25th season, or really anywhere in between. Irregardless of our skill sets and our experience levels, we can all improve our processes. And my goal with this time with you this evening is simply to give you information to think about. I'm not here to tell you to do anything. I'm not here to try to change anything you're doing. All I'm here to do is offer you information and offer you observations from my perspective, just things that I've seen over the years. And ultimately, we are a group of professionals. We are all friends. We are all peers, professionals. This is a roundtable discussion. This is not a teacher-student discussion, because we're all students and we're all teachers in some regards. So I just kind of want to start the presentation with that expectation that I'm here as your friend and your colleague. I'm not here as a trainer. I'm not here as the Tandem program director for UPT telling you have to do anything different. I'm only here to share ideas. And at the end of this hour, you might decide that everything that I've told you is crazy and you don't want to apply any of it. That's okay. You have my permission to ignore everything I'm going to say. However, I think that you'll probably find something in the next hour that might make you better, safer, might improve your processes. And ultimately, that's my goal, is just give you information to think about. And most importantly, we're only going to be together for about an hour here tonight. This is a conversation that you can continue with each other, whether you agree with my ideas and my philosophies or not. When this presentation is over, I hope that on Saturday, when you're at the drop zone together, that you're still talking about this information and that you're still deciding your own opinions, your own perspectives, and your own performance standards. And if you're doing that, then this hour will be a success. So to start, I want to share with you an idea that every one of us is capable of having a good exit or a bad exit when we leave the airplane. and I can't really see everybody's screen in front of me, but we have probably, is it 15 or 16 people with us roughly? Oh, 40 now, or 40 people. Okay. Show of hands, how many people have had a bad exit making a tandem jump in the last year? Okay, I see 3. Okay, I see hands going up. Bad exits are going to happen. It doesn't matter how good you are, how experienced you are. Every one of us is going to have a bad exit at some point or another in our tandem jumping. And the goal of every exit is to achieve a stable transition from inside the aircraft to outside the aircraft. And once we've exited the aircraft and achieved that stable transition, our goal is to set the drogue. It's very simple, but it's a 3-step process. Exit the aircraft, achieve stability, and set the drogue. Now, another show of hands. How many of you have had really good, solid, clean exits that were fantastic? Right? Everybody's hand should go up. We've all had good exits. We've all had good exits, and we've all had bad exits. Now, here's the example that I want to share with you, or the idea that I want to share with you. This is very important to me. It's something that I've figured out over the years. When you have a good exit, when everything goes right, it's not good luck. It's good performance. When you have a bad exit, when everything goes wrong, it's not bad luck, and it's not a bad performance. Every exit that we make, whether it's a good exit or a bad exit, it is always the sum of the decisions that we make in exiting the aircraft. So when we have a bad exit, that is always the logical outcome of a series of poor decisions we make, bad decisions that we make. And I want to ask you guys, kind of help me out here. What do you think some of the bad decisions are that we can make on a tandem exit as tandem instructors? And I'll leave this to our moderator, whether it's by text or by audio. What are some of the bad decisions that we make as tandem instructors?
Yeah, you can write them in the chat if you want. Shooting drogue too fast.
Yes, we call that a cobra strike. It's the shooting the drogue too fast. Yep, absolutely. Anything else?
Nothing yet. Bad position in the door.
Bad position in the door. I like that. Yep.
Trying too hard. I don't know what we're trying too hard, Dan. What are we trying too hard, Dan?
Maybe too much energy. We're exiting the aircraft too hard. No, I like that one from Lukta, not in the relative wind. Anything else? Give me one more.
Unstable position for drogue.
Drogue. Yeah.
Unstable drogue throw. Yes. Okay. Great.
Bad briefings of the student in advance.
Yep. Bad briefings. Yep.
Goofing off of a video man.
Goofing with video man. Excellent. All right. So those are some great ideas. Now, I want to thank you all for contributing. So we've just identified a number of bad decisions that we can make on every tandem exit that we make. Every time we jump tandem, we can throw the drogue too soon. We can put ourselves in bad body position in the door. We can try too hard. We can exit away from the relative wind. We can throw the drogue unstable. We can perform poor briefings with our passengers, and we can goof off and have too much fun with our camera people, right? So these are all bad decisions that we can make from time to time. Just so you know, I wrote down a list as everything was being written down. Now, typically, it's been my experience, you can make 1 or 2 bad decisions and still have a successful exit. You can have a bad body position in the door, but as long as you leave the aircraft and fly your body, you can still achieve stability. You can exit the aircraft away from the relative wind, but again, as long as you perform your correct body positions and you skydive the exit, you can still achieve a stable exit. So it's very rarely just 1 or 2 things that create a bad exit in tandem jumping. It's traditionally a multiple of bad decisions, a multiple of bad decisions that eventually lead us to the only possible outcome of the bad exit, the poor performance. So I want you to think about this in the context of your decision-making processes. What are good decisions you can make? We've identified the bad decisions, and I'm just going to use the list and come back down and talk about the good decisions we can make instead of bad decisions. So the first one is, someone mentioned bad student briefing. That's probably the foundation of the bad exit. That's where it starts. We don't take a lot of time to train our students. So I don't know if anyone is taking notes at your desk. I hope you are. You have a little notepad like I do and have a pen with you. The first note that I would ask you to write down is, ask yourself, am I conducting a thorough student briefing on the ground? Now, hopefully the answer is yes, but be honest with yourself. Maybe the answer is no. Maybe you're not doing a very good student briefing. And you know what? That's okay. You know why it's okay? Because nobody's judging. And we're not skydiving right now. We're in our homes, we're in front of computers. We have all the time in the world to think things through and all the time in the world to improve our processes here on the ground. So first observation for you as the tandem instructors, ask yourself, am I giving a good student briefing? Or can my student briefing be better? Now, this is a question that you may or may not be able to answer yourself, because perhaps you're a new instructor. Perhaps you haven't done a lot of tandems in the last couple of years. This is a great question to sit around as a group of tandem instructors, your team, your drop zone, and as a collective, try to decide, are we giving thorough, good, adequate briefings? And where can we improve them if we're not? So that would be my first recommendation to you, is look at how you're briefing your students and look at the overall performance of the students based on your briefing. Where would we be able to look at the performance of our students tonight while we're sitting at home? Anyone? Where do you think we could find performance of our students?
I guess by reviewing videos from Tandem jumps before.
Yes, reviewing videos from tandem jumps before. Where do we find most of these videos? On YouTube, right?
Exactly, online.
Yeah, you guys have YouTube, right?
Yep.
Whether it's YouTube or any other social platform, what I always recommend to tandem instructors who want to review their performance, don't look at the videos that you have. Look at the videos that other people have of you. I'm going to say that again to make sure it's clear. Don't review your own videos. Review the videos that you don't have, the videos that your customers have uploaded, the videos that are online that you have no control over, because those are the videos that you will be judged on as a tandem instructor. The videos that you can't control, the videos that you can't black out, the videos that are out there for the world to see. So when you look at those videos, that's the best place to analyze all of your performance standards, starting with the briefing. So we look at our briefing of our students and we see how that briefing has affected their participation, their performance in our tandem jumps. Now, the second one that I want to address here, and this is an amazing observation because it is so true and it is so easy to see. Bad body position in the door. Let me expand on that for a moment, however, though. When we're talking about bad body position in the door, there's actually two people in the door. Who are they? There's the instructor, and then there's the passenger or student. So we actually have two different people in the door of the aircraft that could have a good body position or a bad body position. More often than not, it's our students. Would you guys agree by a show of hands? More often than not, it's our student body position that is poor and not ours, because we're the professional instructors. We do this 5-10 times a day, but for the student, it's their first experience. So I want to ask a question. How many of you are looking at your student's body position in the door of the aircraft to make sure that it is correct, to make sure that they're arms are back, their head is back, their spine is curved, that they are in a small neutral body position. How many of us are actually looking at the student body position in the door of the aircraft? Okay, and it's okay if your hands aren't going up right now, that's okay. Again, because we are on the ground just talking about this. So one of the best decisions that we can make as tandem instructors is to observe our student body position in the door of the aircraft before we leave the plane. I'm going to say that again slowly because it's an important piece of information. One of the best things we can do as tandem instructors is to observe our passenger's body position in the door of the aircraft before we leave the airplane. As we're moving to the door, as we position ourselves in the door, we take a moment and we scan. We look at the body position of our passengers because sometimes their position is going to be good, right? Other times, not so good. Now, this is probably the most important piece of information I'm going to give you this hour, so hopefully everybody's paying attention. Do I have your attention? If your passenger's body position is not correct in the door of the aircraft, you have time to fix it before you leave the airplane. Would you agree? You can nod your head, give me a thumbs up. I see a couple of heads being shaken. No, there's not enough time to fix the door in the aircraft. Can someone expand on that for me? Why wouldn't there be enough time to fix in the aircraft? I see somebody smiling.
Yeah, somebody's already asking to answer. Stefan. Stefan?
No, I think it was Johan. I'll ask him to unmute.
Yeah, I think it was Jan. Yeah.
Yeah.
The super van flies too fast. Okay. Let me ask you a question. So how fast does the super van fly? Eight, 80 knots. I see 80 knots coming from somebody.
Yeah, it flies. Yeah.
Okay.
85 maybe.
So, and this is just a conversation we're having together as a team. So how fast does a Cessna 182 run in for jump run? The airspeed of a Cessna 182. 70 knots, 65, 70. Okay, so let's talk about this for a minute. And admittedly, I am a pilot, but I only have 120 hours flying. I'm not an expert pilot. I'm certainly not a commercial pilot, but I've exited aircraft traveling as fast as 135 knots recently within the last couple of months, and as slow as 75 knots between the two. And in both instances, high-speed aircraft traveling at 135 knots and a slow-speed aircraft at 75 knots, in both instances, there was enough time in the door of the aircraft to be able to change the passenger's body position if it wasn't correct. And the reason there was enough time in that is that, just like anything else we do, the more we practice something, the better we are at it. And I'll give you a perfect example on the ground. Every one of you had to learn how to pack your first parachute, right? And it probably took you 40 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour to pack your first parachute as a skydiver. But today you can pack that same parachute in less than 10 minutes, maybe 15 if you're tired. So the more we do something, the better we are at it. So in the beginning, even with fast aircraft, you know, and honestly, even as fast as a super van is climbing to altitude, it doesn't have to fly that fast when it's dropping jumpers. You know, the actual jump run speeds aren't that fast compared to how quick it actually climbs. So my suggestion for you would be to get into a habit of scanning your passenger's body position on every exit and fixing it in the door of the aircraft, even in the fast moving airplanes. If you're in a fast moving aircraft, start your climb out, start your jump run a little bit sooner. Give yourself the time to position your passengers. And I promise you, if you do this every single jump, you'll get faster and faster and faster at it. Eventually, you'll be doing it as you put the passenger in the door rather than doing it after you put them in the door. And this is such an important part of our process as tandem instructors, because if your student's body position is perfect, your likelihood of a successful exit without being unstable dramatically increases. So I'll give you one last thought on this. In the aircraft, I really have all the time in the world to fix their body position, even if it means I have to go around 180 degrees and we have to delay the exit. In the aircraft, I can fix the student's body position from start to finish. I have all the time in the world. Once we've left the aircraft, now we have a very, very small amount of time to fix their body position. Or if we can't fix it, the only other option is to throw a drogue unstable or to deploy a reserve unstable. So my philosophy has always been, it is better to prevent problems than to have to fix them. So I'd ask you guys to write that down if you're taking notes, especially when it comes to tandem jumping. It is so much better and so much easier to prevent problems rather than having to fix problems after they've presented themselves. That's my entire philosophy on tandem jumping. Every problem we face can be prevented as easily, if not easier, than having to actually fix them. So I would encourage everyone to focus on their passenger body position in the door of the aircraft on every jump, and talk together as a team. Include your pilot so that everyone knows what we're doing. Because if we do that, we improve our exit performance instantly, and it becomes so much better with that one subtle change. All right, the next item, someone mentioned the relative wind. Now imagine, I'll go this way. Imagine the plane is flying this way, and I'm in a side door aircraft. I'm in a super van. So the plane is flying in this direction, which means the relative wind is coming in this direction. And I'm leaving the aircraft out of a side door. The plane's line of flight is this way, right? This is 0 degrees relative wind into the wind. 180 degrees to the relative wind. And here I am exiting 90 degrees to the relative wind. It is absolutely possible to exit an aircraft 90 degrees to the relative wind and achieve stability. Matter of fact, I'll be right back. Exiting an aircraft 90 degrees to the relative wind. Stable. It's possible. However, we have to work a lot harder to exit an aircraft and achieve stability at 90 degrees. It is so much easier to exit the aircraft into the relative wind. It makes achieving stability that much easier for us. So I'm going to ask you to hold with me for one moment. Okay, so how do I share my screen? Let's see here.
Should be a button to share your screen at the bottom.
Okay.
Perfect.
Can everybody see this photo? So this photo is an exit into the relative wind. The aircraft is flying this way, and the tandem pair simply exits into the relative wind. The relative wind is hitting the tandem pair on the chest. This is a much more stable exit body posture than this one, okay? So when we talk about tandem exits, this exit was beautiful, this exit was perfect. The tandem pair just slid right down the relative wind, the hill, into a neutral position for a drogue set. But here is the question I want to ask you. When do we decide how we exit the airplane? Do we do it on the ground or in the aircraft? Anyone? How about on the ground?
We got mixed reactions. Most people decide on the ground.
Okay, most people decide on the ground. That is correct. Yes, that would be my perspective. So every aircraft that we exit out of, whether it's a Twin Otter or a Supervan or a Cessna 182, we can decide our exit strategy before we board the aircraft, or we can decide our exit strategy after we board the aircraft as we're putting ourselves in the door. So again, it is much easier to decide that before we move into the aircraft than after we've left the aircraft. I'm going to show you another picture. Oops. Actually, this is a video. This is a 182 exit. So what orientation is this tandem instructor to the relative wind? Is he 0 in the line of flight with the aircraft, or is he 90 degrees towards the wing?
90.
90, correct. Watch what happens here. He rotates himself 0 degrees into the relative wind. This is something that the instructor practiced on the ground. This pivot off the step or the wheel in this case turns himself 0 degrees into the relative wind. This exit is a successful exit. It's perfectly stable. And the reason why it's perfectly stable is that this instructor made a number of good decisions that put him 0 degrees into the relative wind. It's hard to see in the door. He's checking the passenger's body position. He's using a correct exit technique and turning into the relative wind. So the fact that this exit was perfect, it wasn't an accident, it wasn't good luck. No. This instructor on the ground looked at his aircraft, determined what type of exit he wanted to make, an exit that required him to turn 90 degrees as he exited the aircraft. He provided a solid briefing to his passenger, and then he checked his passenger's body position in the door of the aircraft. So this instructor made a lot of good decisions. And in making those good decisions, the only outcome was a successful exit. And if you watch this instructor, and if we were to pull up 10 videos of this instructor, every one of them would look like this. He makes the same good decisions over and over and over again. And ultimately, that's our goal, is to make good decisions as a tandem instructor. And in making good decisions as a tandem instructor, we reduce the possibility of having a bad exit. Any questions so far? No. How am I doing, guys, so far as the way that I'm speaking? Is it okay? Are you able to hear me clearly? Good. All right, I want to run a presentation for you now.
Maybe if I may interrupt 1 second.
Yes.
I could give an overview. There's about 22 people, like half of our audience answered our questionnaire. So to give you an overview of who you're talking to, that might be interesting from you, for your perspective as well.
Yes, I would love to hear it. Yes, please.
So here we go. So hopefully you can see my screen now.
I can, yes.
So We asked them questions like, how many jumps do you have in total? There are some people that are not Tandem Master, so they're not participating, but we can see that most of them have between 500 and above jumps. So that's normal for a Tandem Master. Otherwise, you're not allowed to be one. So you can see a little bit here. How many years have you been a Tandem Master? Less than 2 years, quite a big bunch. And the rest on the more experienced side. This is an interesting one because we only were allowed to jump for 4 months in Belgium.
Yep.
How many tandem jumps did you do in 2020? And here you can clearly see one person less than 25, most of them on the range, the minimum range that we oblige people to do is 25. And then you can see 25 to 50 is quite a big bunch, and then more than 50, luckily the bigger part of the people. When was your last tandem jump? You can already see we stopped jumping in October. There you go. Some people might have jumped even before October. So that's that's a long time. It's at least 6 months without having jumped without a tandem instructor. So for the record, in Flanders, in the northern part, you need to we do first 5 jumps before you're allowed to do any instruction. We have to do a recycling course, and you have to jump with somebody who is a D license holder before you're allowed to take students. And another question was, how many cutaways did you do? 14 people said none. 4 people said 4. 2 people said 2, and 2 people said more than 3. So that's a little bit the experience level that we have here today. Okay. You're still muted, Tom.
So this next topic of conversation, this presentation that I want to discuss with you, it has to do with observation strategies. Now, what I'm referring to in terms of observation strategy is, I quote, the action or process of observing something or someone carefully in order to gain information. That's what observation means. And the reason why this is so important, I'm sorry, what was that?
Can you share it again?
Yes. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen?
No, because I took over, so you'll have to.
You took over, yes.
Here again, sorry for that.
Okay,
Yep.
Can everybody see me now? Yep. Great, let me just move this out of the way. All right, so as tandem instructors, one of the best things we can do to ensure our safety and the safety of those around us is to always be watching, always be looking for problems on the ground. Problems in our equipment, problems in our friends' equipment, problems in our training. The reason why it's so important to look for problems on the ground is because they do exist. And when we catch them on the ground, they're so much easier to fix than when we catch them or find ourselves in the problem after we've left the aircraft. So what I ask of every tandem instructor that I work with, what I ask of every tandem examiner that I work with, is to develop what I call observation strategies or observation criteria for looking at the gear and looking at the processes that we work in so that we can catch problems before they become problems. So again, observation criteria. What does observation mean? To observe, it's the action or process of observing something carefully in order to gain information. We want to find some information out. And for us as tandem instructors, that information we're looking for, is it correct or is it not correct? Is our gear correct? Is our exit procedure correct? And if it's not correct, how can we fix it? So these are the different areas that we should, as tandem instructors, be able to develop strategies of observation in our equipment, in our instructor harness fit, in our student harness fitting, pre-flight of our equipment, ground observations, things that we see on the ground while we're waiting for the plane, exit observations, things that we can see in the plane, things that we can see when we throw the drogue fall observations, canopy flight, and lastly landing. So we're going to touch on each one of these areas here. So when we look at our equipment, what are we looking for? We're looking for whether or not we're jumping a sigma versus a micro sigma. Why might that be important? Why might knowing the size of the system be important to us as tandem instructors? Any ideas, any thoughts? What's the difference between a sigma and a micro sigma?
It sits differently and adjusts your center of balance.
Okay, those are both good answers, but ultimately it's the size, the main parachute that it can hold. So knowing whether you're jumping a sigma versus a micro sigma, you should be able to look at the systems and recognize approximately the size of the parachutes you're jumping, whether it's a 370 or a 340, depending upon whether it's a sigma or micro sigma. So knowing which gear you're jumping will help you choose the right system for the tandem jumps you're making. The next observation is your AADs. What are the approved AADs for the sigma and micro sigma? I'll start. Cypress 2. What else?
The Vigil.
Yep, all the Vigils are approved, and there's one more.
Could be the Mars.
Mars, yes. Is the Cypress 1 approved? The original Cypress?
Should be expired by now.
Correct, not approved. But they're still out there. They're still being traveled around the world. So it's possible you might find an original Cypress in one of these units unknowingly. And then also the Argus is not approved either. So if you saw an Argus or a Cypress 1, you would want to ground the gear and not jump it. What about main container flap damage? Have you seen any damage to the main pack tray when the equipment gets worn or gets old or gets used terribly? Looking for the main container to make sure that it is still rigid and still sewn together properly, that there aren't any tears or any damage to the sewing on the seams, because the main container is what's holding the disc in place with the main pack tray and the system. So when we're looking at our equipment, we want to look at the condition of the main flaps, condition of the packing style. Now, I'm going to use a demonstration tool here. The main pack tray, the bag, goes into the system flat. But for some reason, we have packers that sometimes want to put the bag in vertically instead of flat, so that the pilot chute attachment point is on top of the flaps rather than between the main and reserve pack tray. So it still can be closed that way. If the main bag is put in incorrectly, it can still be compressed, but it creates a lump in the middle of the pack tray. The system looks like it's fatter in the middle, and it's clearly visible on the ground if a packer is packing that way. But it's only visible if we're looking for it. If we don't look and don't know what correctly packed parachutes look like and what incorrectly packed parachutes look like, then we have the potential to jump the system with an improperly packed main parachute, which increases the pull force on the pins, as opposed to opening the pack tray up, rotating the bag correctly, and closing it with the appropriate pin force. So I would ask you, as tandem instructors, are you aware that your packers are putting the main bag into the pack tray correctly or incorrectly? And you can look at the Sigma manual will clearly show you how the correct process is in place. And if you don't know if they're doing it correctly, what could you do? We could watch them. We could watch a pack job and ensure that it's being done correctly.
This is actually
yes.
Interesting. What is the correct way? Where should the drogue attachment point be? On top?
Okay, give me 1 second here. I will show you a picture of it. And this manual is available on our website. Okay, so you can see here that the bag is placed into the pack tray with the line stows on the bottom of the pack tray, and the pilot chute attachment point is right here on the top of the pack tray. Here's the bridle coming to the top of the pack tray. That is the correct orientation for the bag to sit cleanly in the pack tray. But oftentimes we'll see tandem packers rotate the bag 90 degrees so that the line stows are at the back of the pack tray, not the bottom, and that this attachment point that should be on the top of the pack tray is actually right here on the center of the pack tray. Does that make sense? That the bag is 90 degrees. If you imagine rotating this bag 90 degrees, it will still close that way, but it is incorrect.
Okay. Okay. I think we've been doing it wrong.
Okay. So next question, is the student harness compatible? Are you using Sigma student harnesses with Sigma systems, or are you mismatching Strong's or Jump Shack's or someone else's, making sure you're using the right student harness with the system? Are we jumping with closed-toed shoes, no bare feet, no flip-flops? Everybody should be jumping in sneakers or some form of closed-toed shoes. Are we wearing helmets? Now, we don't require the use of helmets, but helmets are a pretty good idea because they prevent us from hitting our heads inside the aircraft, and if we have hard landings, prevents us from getting injured on landing. Are we jumping with goggles? Can we see through them?
Maybe to jump into that, Tom.
Yes.
In Flanders, helmets, shoes, and goggles are obliged, so there is no choosing.
Okay.
Maybe just to come back to the previous question, there's some people asking about the incorrectness of the position of the bag. They're asking like maybe some reason behind and what could be the potential effect of doing it incorrect.
Yes, and if you'll hold on for just 1 second, I think I can actually grab a bag so I can show it to you while we're talking. I'll be right back. Give me one moment. Okay. All right, so as you can see here with this bag, it's not a perfect square, okay? It's actually bigger this way than it is this way. Does that make sense? The actual dimensions of the bag are different. The dimensions of the bag are different with the line stows on the bottom versus the line stows on the side. So if we put the bag in this way, we now have to close the container and force the bag down if the pilot chute attachment point is facing the sky. That puts more pressure on the disc and more pressure on the flaps, which increases the potential pull force for the pin. It also increases the force against the flaps, which could wear out the flaps faster. So the two answers to that question are potentially it increases the pull force of the system for the main release. And secondly, that because this is not the correct fit for the bag in the pack tray, you're stretching and flexing the container on the flaps in ways that it wasn't intended to be, which only increases the probability of it wearing out faster, of wear and tear happening faster. Does that make sense? And I know it's a black bag, so it's kind of hard to see, but if you look at it, it's very clearly two different shapes. In this orientation, it is flatter in this orientation. Is that a good explanation?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so you said that you've already covered closed-toed shoes, helmets, goggles. What about altimeters? How many of you guys jump with digital altimeters that require batteries? How many of us check the batteries every morning after we turn them on to make sure that they don't need to be replaced? We don't always do that. And it's not uncommon to have a battery fail on us midway through the day because we've simply didn't check before we got on the airplane. So checking your altimeter batteries is a very simple observation strategy, but something we should be doing. Do we have the right jumpsuit for this kind of skydiving we're doing? Do we have enough drag on our arms? Do we have enough drag on our legs? What about the elevation we're jumping at? Are you jumping at sea level in Belgium, or do you have mountain drop zones?
We have drop zones that are a few hundred feet higher than others, yes.
Okay, so not a lot of elevation, but there are some countries like France where the elevation can be 2,000 meters difference between some drop zones. So making sure you have the right parachute for the right altitude you're jumping at, and ultimately your aircraft. What aircraft are you jumping out of? Excuse me. Because every aircraft you jump out of is going to change how you exit the airplane, the speed you're exiting the airplane, and how you're going to perform your processes in the airplane, your hookup sequence and your movement to the door. So being aware of the different aircraft you're using and developing strategies for those aircraft will only make you safer and only increase the probability of a successful exit and outcome. So this brings us to instructor harness fit. Can you guys see the sigma on that tandem instructor? It's on the left side of the picture. Is it properly fitted? I'm seeing a lot of heads shaking back and forth. No, you are correct. It is not fitted correctly. How do we know that it is not fit correctly? Because the rig has lifted up off of his back. The rig has been picked up off of his back. You can clearly see that here. So, homework assignment, if you will. After we finish here today, I want you to watch your videos and look at the sigma, look at the system on your back. If it's picking up off your back, it doesn't fit correctly. What is the corrective measure here? How do we make this better? Can someone tell me, how would we bring the rig back down to his back? Anyone? Tighten the main lift web. So this rig is too long in the main lift web. So if we tighten the main lift web, that will bring the tandem system back down onto his back. So every one of us should be checking our videos to see, is the tandem system lifting off of our back, or is it properly fitted on our back? There are two other ways that we can check to make sure our sigmas and micro sigmas are properly fitted, and that's by looking at the 3-ring locations. The 3-ring should be on the front of your shirt. You can see there's a seam here on my shirt. The 3 rings should be in the front of the seam. If the 3 rings are on top of the shoulder, that means the system is sliding down your back because the main lift web is too long. So that would be another reason to tighten the main lift web and bring the 3 rings back in front of your shoulders. And then last but not least, because there is a main lift web adjustment on each side, are the 3 rings symmetrical on each side? You can tighten them one at a time, and if they're not properly tightened at the same symmetry, one of your 3 rings could be higher than the other. So making sure that your 3 rings are at the same symmetry, the 3 rings are in front of your shoulder, not on top of your shoulder, and that the sigma system is not lifting off of your back. Those are 3 observation strategies you can use to ensure that you've properly fitted the instructor harness on your body. So the next one is the passenger harness. The next observation strategy is, has the passenger harness been put on correctly? What are we looking for in a properly fitted passenger harness? We are looking for the waist strap around the belt area, which this looks like it is. We're looking for the 4-point apex of the leg straps. This juncture of the leg straps is on the front of the hip or the ball of the hip. That looks good. The hardware of the main lift web is symmetrical. But what we're seeing here that's not symmetrical and not correct is that the belly band, the chest strap, is down here around the belly. The chest strap, which is right here, it's supposed to be placed just below the chest at the sternum. For some reason, tandem instructors like to take the chest strap and bring it down to the waist area. I don't understand why that happens. We don't teach it, but it's being done. So I would ask you to inspect your passenger harness fittings together and make sure that you're following all of the procedures. This chest strap should be here at his chest, not down at his belly button, not down at his waist. We then look at the back of the harness. Is the Y strap hanging below the harness, or is the Y strap up against the harness? And then is there symmetry in the harness? So these are all just things we can look at in relationship to the student harness to make sure that it is properly fitted. If you look at this 3-ring assembly here, you can see that it's incorrect, I hope. Can someone tell me what's wrong with it?
They're going to the same, to the primary buckle.
Yes. So the mini ring and the middle ring are both passing through the large ring. This is what we call a 2-ring system. This is where the 3-ring system has been incorrectly attached. And now we have 2 rings passing through the large ring. This increases the pull force on a cutaway by a factor of 4, and you cannot cut away in this configuration. If you have a main parachute malfunction, you cannot cut away from that configuration. So I ask you, when you're doing your pre-flight inspections of your gear, are you thoroughly inspecting your 3 rings? Because this situation has been jumped multiple times over the years. This 2-ring configuration, it's been jumped by highly experienced skydivers. And in one case, it actually led to a double fatality. The tandem instructor could not cut away from the main parachute because of this configuration. And the truly tragic part of that was that he wasn't the only tandem instructor to jump that. There were other tandem instructors that jumped the very same tandem system because none of them were looking at it to make sure that it was correct. They just assumed that it was correct. So I ask you to please, every time you put a tandem system on your back, make sure that you check the 3 rings to make sure they are properly stowed, they're properly configured. And while we're here, I'm going to go to how do I drop screen share for just one moment?
I can,
you can pause it at the top.
Apologies.
Do you want me to stop your screen share?
Yeah, why don't you stop it for me? I'm just gonna, okay, perfect. I'll be right back to you in 1 second. I'm gonna pull up a video. I just find it's easier to find videos when everyone's not looking at my at my hard drive. It's easier to find the one I'm looking for.
So yeah. Question, what do you have to hide?
Yeah, we don't want to see what's in your hard drive.
No, it's something about when people are watching you do something, it's harder to find things. gear. Okay, I think I'm back. Am I back?
Yep, we can see it.
Great. Okay, so what you're seeing here you're seeing a reserve pilot chute that's expanded inside the pack tray that has the ability to move around inside the closed container. This is something that is very serious because over time, the reserves will start to expand inside the pack job over a 180-day pack cycle, just through temperature changes, through landings, wear and tear, things like that, that it's possible for the system to start to expand the reserve pilot chute inside the pack tray. And when the pilot chute expands inside the pack tray, it starts to lose some of its launch force. And it's our job as instructors to make sure that we have a properly seated reserve in the pack tray that has all of its launch force available to it if and when we need it. So making sure that your reserve pilot chutes are not wobbling inside the reserve pack tray over time is one of these pre-flight observations. And if it is wobbling, it's very simple to fix. Your rigger that packed it can open it back up again, tighten the loop, close it again, and firmly seat it against the pack job. So doing that and is critical to ensure in that worst case scenario, if you're in a tandem terminal side spin and you want the reserve to launch off your back as cleanly as possible, making sure it's pressed firmly against the pack tray will increase its probability of a successful firm launch into clean air. So that's just one part of the pre-flight observation. The next one is the reserve pin. Are you looking at the reserve pins to make sure that they are not damaged, not bent, that the loops are not being bent? And if they are, pulling the systems offline. We see that tandem instructors tend to just put the rig on their back and not actually inspect the reserve pins and pack tray for any damage through use. Other pre-flight observations: is the disc oriented correctly where the arrow is at 12 o'clock? And I think one of the most important observations we have for tandem jumping is the drogue fold, and is the bridle protected? Show of hands, if you have a properly folded drogue, should you be able to see any of the Kevlar bridle? Yes or no? Yes, anyone? No, anyone? The correct answer is no. In a properly folded drogue, you should not be able to see any Kevlar bridle. Yet, every weekend in drop zones around the world, instructors will board an aircraft with bridle exposed because they're not looking for it to fix it. They don't know what perfect looks like. They don't know what correct looks like. So you can change that by essentially looking for this and knowing that if you see Kevlar bridle, which you shouldn't see, stop, fix it on the ground before it becomes a problem in the air. Then moving on, is the main lift web symmetrical? Is the AAD in tandem mode? Today with multi-mode AADs, it is possible for your AAD to be in the wrong mode. So making sure it's in tandem mode, making sure that the main pack tray is smooth, that there's no lumps or damage to the main pack tray, and then making sure that the bungee pin orientation is correct. And I'm going to go back to the manual for this. Here's our disc orientation with the arrow pointing up. And here's our proper pin orientation. One of the most common causes for deployment hesitations of the golf balls is that the pin, the straight pin, is rotated over 180 degrees. You see here how the loop is coming up, the bungee recoil is coming up to the pin, and then it's coming out of the pin and down to the bungee recoils. If we take the pin and rotate it 180 degrees, the spectra from the bungee anchor point goes down into the pin rather than coming up out of the pin, and it's effectively inverted. Does that, I apologize if I'm not saying that correctly. Does that make sense to everyone, that the pin can go in one of two directions? Are we familiar with that? That the properly oriented pin has the spectra loop coming out of the top of the eyelet here, out of the top of the pinhole and down to the bungee recoils. So just being able to find things like that when they are correct and incorrect and fixing them during your pre-flight, that will improve the probability of successful outcomes. Now, we've just reviewed a lot of gear questions and a lot of gear issues, whether or not there's Kevlar exposed on a drogue bridle, whether we're wearing helmets, closed-toed shoes, symmetry in the harnesses. Here's the most important ground observation strategy that I can give you, and that is when you're standing in the boarding area with your friends, you should be looking at every other person's equipment, including your own. You should be checking everyone's equipment visually to make sure everything is correct on every system that you have eyes on. I promise you, if you get into a habit of inspecting your equipment and inspecting your friend's equipment on every jump on the ground, you will catch something that someone missed. And by catching it, you will make them safer and you will have a safer environment to work in. So whether it's properly sized instructor harnesses, whether it's the shoulder D-ring location, I mentioned that the 3 rings were in front of the shoulder here, they're clearly in front of the shoulder here. Is the drogue primed? Have they pulled the drogue out of the pocket on the ground because they're afraid they're not going to be able to reach it or not? In this case, we have a correctly folded drogue. Is the chest strap properly routed? Is the excess webbing properly routed? And then we ask ourselves, what did we miss? We go back and we check again and again. The reason why this is so important, why finding these problems on the ground is so important, is that if we don't fix them on the ground, they're going to present problems in the sky. So we should be looking at our equipment and all of our teammates' equipment to every jump on the ground to make sure that it's properly fit and that there aren't any mistakes in it. We already covered exits when we talked earlier this hour about body position. We know you guys aren't using hand cam in Belgium, is that correct? So hand cam is probably not a factor for you, but
no, it's not.
It is.
But your body position for your passenger and yourself are critical. And if you don't fix it in the aircraft, the only other opportunity to fix it is out of the aircraft in pre-fall. I'm going to end the presentation with in a few minutes on a separate discussion on setting the drogue, but I want to look at this photo for a moment. What's wrong with this photo? What issue do you see here with this drogue set? And maybe you don't see a problem, but tell me if you see something.
He is not in a stable orientation yet. He's flying head down at this point, I guess. Okay,
that's a good guess. He's actually in a stable orientation. The relative wind is behind him, so he's not head high. He's actually head low, but the relative wind is hitting his chest. So he's actually stable, diving towards the tail of the aircraft. The problem is he's held on to the drogue too long. The drogue fabric, the white fabric, is starting to unfold while he's still holding on to it. And the bridle is out catching air as well. So when he lets go of this drogue handle, this fabric is going to brush past the bridle. They're going to make contact with each other. Does that make sense? Because of the way he's held on to the drogue, this fabric has to brush past this bridle when it goes behind him into the relative wind. That increases the wear and tear on the system, the drogue damage, and it also increases the possibility of the drogue fabric entangling with the drogue bridle, creating an unstable, creating an uninflated drogue on drogue set, where the drogue is unable to inflate because it has an entanglement in it. So releasing the drogue at the correct point is a critical component of our training. So what do we look for? We're looking for the bridle starting to inflate behind the tandem, and we're looking for the fabric to inflate before it's released. I'm going to show you a video of a correct drogue throw. Okay, so if we look at this drogue set, the drogue is already released as the tandem reaches this perpendicular plane of the shoulder. It's released into clean air. You can see the bridle is right here, and watch what happens. It's still folded. This is very important to be able to process here, is that the drogue is still folded in its perfect S-fold. The drogue has been set to the side of the tandem pair. It's been set here out to the side. This is clean air, and the drogue is lifted, still folded. The relative wind is actually holding the drogue shut. And it's still folded. And now it's still folded above the tandem. The bridle has completely paid out into clean air. And now and only now does the drogue start to inflate. Okay, so just to go back again on the frame by frame. You can see that the drogue stayed folded all the way until it reached its bridle extension, and then in clean air above the tandem, then it finally inflated. We can look at that as a photo. Here you can see exactly the same thing. The drogue is still folded. It's still in clean air. The bridle is paying out. And once the drogue gets to the end of the bridle, this fabric will rotate up above the tandem pair, and it will inflate here above the tandem. So I would ask you all to look at your drogue throws and ask yourself, are the drogues inflating in clean air, or are you seeing canopy fabric and burble bouncing around itself off of the hip of the tandem instructor? So when we're looking at our drogue throws, are we stable when we set the drogue? Are we setting the drogue into the relative wind? Are we using correct technique? Are we setting the drogue to the side, out beside us, as opposed to behind us? The drogue goes out beside us. Are we checking the drogue for inflation after it's been set? And then of course, are we doing our handles checks after the drogue throw? These are all observation criteria that we can see through outside video. So you should be watching your videos and analyzing your drogue throw and your handles checks and looking for any areas that you can improve. Your drogue fall body position. Are you neutral? Is your passenger neutral? Are your hips centered one above the other? Are the side laterals vertical? Are you arching? These are all basic procedures. If you photoshopped out the passenger, the tandem instructor looks just like an AFF student. It's the same body position. Arms could be a little bit better, but it's effectively the same body position. So analyze your drogue fall. Are you neutral? Are your hips centered? Is the container properly attached to your back, meaning that the system is properly sized? And are your legs in a neutral body position, and are you arching? Canopy flight. Every year, we have a couple of tandem instructors who land damaged canopies because they weren't aware the canopies were landing were damaged. So I would ask you, whether you do 50 tandems a year or 500, don't get lazy when it comes to canopy inspection. Once the canopy is open, we look up canopy, slider, connector links, cutaway cables, shoulder hooks, cutaway, reserve, and side connectors. We should be looking at all of these components to make sure they're still in place. And all of this is in our manual. Everything we're talking about tonight, if you download the manual and read through it, all this information is there. Are we doing our controllability checks? Are we flaring the parachute using both toggles? Are we arriving at that decision altitude knowing that we have a good parachute or not? Or are we doing other things and descending through our decision altitudes before we reach for our toggles and release them? When we're setting up our passengers for comfort, we have to be careful of the handles. The problem with the reserve handle is that it makes for a really good handle. It's a good handle to hold on to for you or the passenger. So we have to make sure that the passengers are not putting their hands in the handles. We have to be aware of the passenger's hands at all time. More often than not, when we see tandem instructors landing off the drop zone, it's because they lost their directional awareness. They got so caught up with looking at the parachute, they never stopped to look at where they were going and change their direction back to the airport. So making sure that we're maintaining awareness of our location to the airport. Are we doing practice landings up high? And are we flying a proper pattern? These are also observation strategies, things to look for. And then for landing, are we landing with both toggles, the black and the gold? Are we flaring at the right height? Is the instructor landing first? Are we standing or sitting based on the correct wind conditions? Are we landing accurately, and are we flying a good pattern? These are all questions that we should be able to answer every time we land, and we should be analyzing our landings each and every time we land. So there's been a lot of information that we just talked about. These are just these last slides that we just went through, all of these slides. All they are visual representations of the procedures you were trained to do when you went into your tandem course. And the problem that we face as tandem instructors is that the more we do things, the less likely we are to stick to what we were originally trained to do. And myself included, we're all human. Sometimes we reach for the easier conclusion, the easier task rather than the right task. That's just human nature. And the most important thing we can do as tandem instructors is recognize this, recognize that we are human. Even though we were trained to do things correctly, we might find ourselves not doing something correctly in the future. And if we don't recognize it and stop it, we're going to keep doing it incorrectly because it's easier. And that's going to become our new normal. And enough time will pass, that will feel like it is the correct procedure. So I offer you this to simply say that the most powerful tool you have access to is self-critique, is self-review. Every 3 months or so, you should be looking at your performance. Look at the videos online. Look at the way you're packing the parachute, the way you're pre-flighting the parachute, and simply ask yourself, am I still doing it the way I was trained to do it in my course? And your answer is going to either be yes or no. And if it's yes, keep doing it that way. But if it's no, then stop, stop, figure out why you've changed what you're doing, and then bring it back to the correct procedure that you were trained to do. That is the most powerful decision you can make as a tandem instructor, as a career, whether even if it's just on the weekends, you're doing it, you have another job, this is your weekend side hustle, your weekend job. Every few months, analyze what you're doing. Ask your friends to analyze what you're doing. Get feedback from each other. All of us are capable of making mistakes. All of us are capable of losing our edge, not being as crisp and as precise as we should be. And I'll tell you, I do this myself very often. My reason for that is that because I'm the Tandem program director, I'm probably one of the most critiqued, criticized. People look for me to make mistakes so that they can justify making their own mistakes. It's an unfortunate part of the culture we live in, but it's part of the life. It's part of what we do. So I can't tell you I'll never make a mistake again. I will. I've made mistakes in the past and I'll make them again in the future. Knowing that, and knowing that people are observing my performance, I'm not the best tandem instructor in the world. Many of you are more current and better than I am as far as overall expertise and experience. The only thing I can say about my tandem performance is that I'm very consistent. I do the same thing over and over and over again. And most of the time, those same things are what I was trained to do when I got my tandem rating 20 years ago. And I like to end with a mistake that I made, because here I am talking about all these things we have to do correctly. I'm preaching to you of all the things we have to do correctly, but I make mistakes. I make lots of them, okay? And mistakes are okay. It's how we manage those mistakes. See, everybody's watching and I can't find the video I'm trying to show. That's why I took myself offline before. When people are watching, I can't find it. Oh, here we go. There it is. So one of the first things that I said to you guys when we started this conversation, when we were talking about exits and exit technique, was that your exit consists of three things: exiting the aircraft, achieving stability, and setting the drogue. And they should be done in that order: exit, achieve stability, set drogue. So I'm not very confident. I probably only have about 30 tandem jumps out of a Cessna 206U over a 20-year career. I'm not very current on this aircraft. I did everything that I told you that you should do. I practiced my exit. I determined on the ground I wanted to exit 0 degrees into the relative wind. I gave my student an excellent briefing. I did all the things that I'd asked you to do. And I still blew the exit. Okay, so that was not a great exit, but if we look at it again, exit the aircraft, check. Okay, we did the first thing. We got out of the airplane. Not exactly where I planned to be on that exit. I thought I'd have a better exit than that, but there I am upside down. Now, I have not achieved stability. So therefore, my decision is I can either set the drogue unstable, or I could practice all the things that I like to talk about, is fly my body, achieve stability, which is what I do. Arms out, catching air into the relative wind. The relative wind's hitting us in the chest. Rotating over, and now we're stable we're belly to earth, neutral body position. So even though the exit wasn't great, not every exit's going to be. You can see here the drogue throw, the drogue release. The drogue is still folded. It's still folded. It's still folded. And now, only now does it start to inflate. So I offer you that in that I'm not perfect. None of us are. Some of you are more current than I am because I spend a lot of time at my desk instead of skydiving these days. I just try to follow the very same procedures that I'm asking you guys to follow. And that's really, I guess, the end of my story is I'm not asking you to do anything that I don't ask myself to do or that Bill Booth doesn't ask us all to do. And every one of those procedures in place that you were trained to do, simply designed to keep you and your passengers safe. So look at your videos online, ask yourself if they will pass the course that you took to get your rating. And if the answer is no, that's okay because you're on the ground. You have time to fix it. Figure out what needs to be polished or improved and fix it and improve it before your next tandem jump. And that way, if you find yourself on a video being critiqued by your friends or by someone, you can say, I've done everything I was trained to do. I'm a human being, mistakes can happen, but I've done everything I can to reduce the probability of having a bad exit, because when you make good decisions, successful exits are the result. When you make bad decisions on student training, how you exit the aircraft and your relative wind orientation, that's when bad exits happen. Bad exits are only the result of bad decisions. It's that simple. So together, we can all make good decisions and improve our exit reliability. So that's basically what I wanted to talk to you guys about tonight. I hope it was of use. I think we still have about 10 minutes left. If you guys have any questions for me, please fire away. I'm happy to try to answer them.
All right. Thank you very, very much, Tom. I think that was very insightful. We do indeed have a question about the folding of the drogue, because apparently that triggered quite some people. And the question is actually, I will read it out loud. So we are understanding correctly that the methods on how UPT describes how to fold a drogue is done by design, and in such a way that the drogue will stay deflated until we achieve bridle stretch. If yes, is this to minimize the chance of the drogue fabric anomalies, so that the drogue might get choked or might not properly inflate? That was the question.
Yes, that is correct. So the proper drogue fold is designed to prevent the drogue from entangling with you when you set it, and designed prevent it from entangling with itself as it's deploying. So a proper drogue fold and a proper drogue technique, drogue setting technique, effectively prevent that from happening. And what I can do, I don't know if you guys have seen this. Excuse me. Am I sharing right now?
Yes.
Okay.
The sound itself is not coming through, just for the record.
So what this video does is it shows exactly what the manual is showing, but in visualization. I will send you a link to this, and it's on a YouTube channel. You guys can access this, show it to your packers, and this is from top to bottom how to fold the drogue.
Okay, very good. Any other questions for Tom? You can write them in the chat. Now is your
I've
chance.
got one. Tom, I guess you see a lot of incident and accident reports.
Yes.
Can you see some more common causes of incidents, or more importantly, accidents?
So, yes, there's a saying that incidents and accidents are always the logical outcome of illogical decisions. And if you look at it like a pilot's perspective, airplanes crash because pilots fly them into the ground unintentionally. Now, there's a number of reasons why that happens. It can happen because the pilot fails to check the fuel. The pilot didn't file the appropriate flight plan. The pilot had some other, maybe they were uncurrent, maybe they panicked, maybe they overreacted to a situation. Tandem skydiving is no different. We're pilots as well. We're piloting gliders effectively. We're pilots in command of a much smaller manifest, only one person with us, but we're in free fall and then we're in a parachute. So the good news is fatal incidents and accidents are incredibly low right now, considering how well the gear is made and how successful the training is with our ability to teach this process. There's so many variables that are in our favor. Higher pull altitudes for our main parachute, higher decision altitudes for our reserve parachutes, dedicated training in order to use the system advancements over the years. So there's a lot of things that are protecting us. When incidents and accidents happen, they are inevitably, unfortunately, a failure of the instructor to perform the procedures that they were trained to do. It's that fight or flight mechanism, if you will. People panic and they don't follow the corrective procedures. There's been very few, not that it's not impossible, but there's been very few instances over the last 35 years of tandem jumping where the tandem instructor did everything correctly and still resulted in a fatality or serious incident. It's very rare that that happens. It's possible, but the majority of the incidents and accidents, the vast majority of them, the instructor either did the wrong thing instead of the right thing or failed to do anything at all. And unfortunately, there is still a window of performance standard that in emergency scenarios, we require instructors to be able to perform the procedures correctly. Does that answer the question?
It does. Thank you. I keep going.
Okay, please.
Maybe
I'm here for you.
One final question to round off. And it's
yes.
Also, I think it's also an interesting one for examiners, or at least for very instructed instructors to give along with their new colleagues. So the last question is, any tips for a new or tandem instructor or somebody who is in this the setup of getting their instructor rates? Anything that you can advise?
Yes, it's a marathon, not a sprint. That work within your means and your skill sets. That you'll be working with higher level instructors that are going to offer advice with good intention, that are going to offer good ideas. But as long as you maintain your current standard of performance that you were trained, eventually you will arrive at a point where you will know that you're capable of performing at a higher standard. But my advice is simply take things slowly. I tell people at presentations all the time, the skydives that I'm most proud of are the ones that I chose not to make. And I've done some pretty fun things in the sport, but I've turned down even more fun things. I've turned down jumps and ideas that I just didn't feel comfortable with. So I think as long as we're all jumping, whether it's weight, winds, aircraft, conditions, landing area, equipment, as long as we're all jumping within conditions that we are capable of performing to that standard, I think we're going to all be okay. But once we exceed that standard, that's when we truly risk incident and injury, when we're operating outside of our skill sets. Okay,
I think that's indeed a very good advice for not only for tandem instructors, but also for any skydiver. Okay, top. That leads us to conclude with one last thing to do. And that is, as you might know, that is the wheel of fortune, so to say. I hope you can see my video. We'll give it a spin, and then let's see who won. It's actually Michiel.
Yay!
This is not tricked, so.
No. You can spin it again. It's all right.
Yeah, should I?
Go for it.
You can win as well, so that's fine. So yeah, that's it. The only thing we can say is thank you all for your participation. Thank you a lot, Tom Noonan, for giving us these wise words of advice. And hopefully we are back into the air quickly. And have a nice evening, everybody.
Thanks, guys. If I could be of any help to anybody along the way, shoot me an email, call me, send me a text message. I'm here for you guys. And I appreciate every one of you. We're all on the same team, and I look forward to seeing you at some point in the future.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Mag ik nu de chaos loslaten, Blokkie?
Ja.
Yay.
Zal ik stop recording klikken?
Ja,